Good morning. Ooh, this is loud. My name is Oscar. I'm the moderator of this event. We'll guide you through our special occasion today. Good morning also to the ambassadors of Sweden and Finland. Thank you for being here with us. Let me tell you a little bit about the expectation of today's event. So, Green to Scale, as you might know, is the series of projects that have highlighted the potential of scaling up existing climate solutions. So it's not that much of innovation, it's more or less looking at solutions that are already existing in the market and thinking of how to scale them up. In 2015, the project looked at 17 solutions from 5 different sectors around the globe. In 2016, Green to Scale focused on 15 Nordic solutions. So previous phases have uncovered vast emission reduction potential simply using technologies that we already know. So Green to Scale 2 zooms in 2 regions, the Baltic countries, Poland and Ukraine in Europe, and 2 countries in East Africa, Kenya and Ethiopia. For both of these groups, 10 different solutions have been selected that promise the biggest impact. Nordic Council of Ministers has included Green to Scale project in its Prime Minister's initiative. And the Climate and Air Pollution Group has served as the advisory council for the project. Today's event is organized by Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra in close cooperation with Nordic Council of Ministers Latvia's office. So the results of this analysis are going to be presented today. And of course, the event focuses on key findings for local conditions, for particular conditions in Latvia. If you feel like sharing some information from this event, like pictures and stuff like that, regardless of whatever has been introduced in May 25, last week, you are invited to use hashtags that you see on the screen, Green to Scale and Nordic Solutions. By the way, we also have simultaneous translation available, so for those who don't feel very comfortable with English and can use the devices, those can be found at the entrance. All right, so let's start, and I'm very glad to give floor to His Excellency, the Ambassador of Finland to Latvia, Olli Kantanen.
Esteemed participants of this event, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Labrit, good morning. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to this event, which has managed to gather such an impressive crowd of leading Latvian and Nordic experts and policymakers to discuss and learn from the Nordic Green to Scale results and recommendations for Latvia. For those of you who have heard me speaking before in other events, it should certainly not come as a surprise that I'm a great fan of Nordic and Nordic-Baltic cooperation. A lot has been achieved in this cooperation during the 3 past decades. We stand in multiple ways closer to each other than ever. Today we are equal and like-minded partners in many international organizations where we cooperate and share our common agenda. As we know, the answers for the biggest global challenges, like climate change, need to be found and implemented together. The Nordic Green to Scale is originally based on the Nordic Prime Minister's joint initiative called Nordic Solutions to Global Challenges, as we heard already in the introduction. And for me, in a nutshell, this event this event here in Riga today is a very good example on how we can jointly take the mutually beneficial Nordic-Baltic cooperation forward on a very practical level, and to achieve green growth by learning from each other. Finally, I would also like to thank all the contributors and organizers of this event. Especially, I want to mention the Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra, the Nordic Council of Ministers office in Latvia, Nordic Investment Bank, and the Latvian Institute of Physical Energetics. You are all doing extremely valuable work to build up a more sustainable future for all of us. Thank you. Paldies.
Thank you. And for the introduction, also Stefan Eriksson, the Director of Nordic Council of Ministers, Latvia office.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I will just add a few introductory comments as well. From a Nordic perspective, I can basically sign up to everything that my colleague Olli has said. He also underlined the Nordic perspective of today's event. Nordic Green to Scale is truly a good example of Nordic cooperation. It is, as has been already said, part of the Nordic Prime Minister's initiative, Nordic Solutions to Global Challenges. And this phase of Nordic Green to Scale is carried out by Finnish Sitra, as was mentioned, but partners participate from Norway, Denmark, and Iceland. There's also Baltic participation, since the technical analysis is produced by the Tallinn Center of Stockholm Environmental Institute. When it comes to issues of climate change, not least energy efficiency and security, there are of course differences between our Nordic countries and also Baltic countries, but still there is a great deal of interdependence and a good potential for cooperation. Our office, the Nordic Council of Ministers office in Latvia, together with the Nordic embassies, have recently supported several events dedicated to these topics: climate change, Nordic-Baltic energy perspectives, smart cities. We are also following with interest the cooperation between Nordic energy research and Latvia that is developing and expanding. And from our office, we're very glad to be able to assist in arranging today's seminar. Special thanks to my colleagues, in particular Maja Kahle, who has been behind all of this. Thank you.
So the Institute of Physical Energetics was mentioned already several times, and I'm glad to introduce you with the director of this institute, Irina Olenikova, that will guide us through, or more or less introduce us with today's topic. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation, dear guests, dear embassy's representatives, dear minister. It's a pleasure to be here, and it is really pleasure for me to represent our institute, Institute of Physical Energetics, and these activities in the climate change policy, what we are doing here. And thank you very much to Sitra for this very nice cooperation, very valuable also for our institute. So my presentation today will be focused on scaling up climate solutions in Latvia and calculation of greenhouse gas projection in Latvia, what we are doing in our institute. First of all, I would like to show some numbers and figures which represent economy development and GHG emission in Latvia in comparison with GDP growth, emission growth, and final energy consumptions. Roles of our institute for the GHG projection, calculation, and climate change in Latvia. So we are establishing the national system for the emission projection calculation and reporting to national institution in order to make a more consistent and long-term national system and regulation for establishment and maintenance of a national system. The role of our institute, so we are also responsible for the GHG emission projection calculation in energy sector, in the transport sector, and partly in industrial processes sector, as a significant part of a climate policy's development of the policy impact assessment. Our institute has developed the modeling tool Markal Latvia, and the future slides I would like to show some results and some possibility of these tools, what we are doing here. So the tool is focused on emission projection for energy sector. It's a projection of GHG emission for national studies, international communication, monitoring of EU according to European directives and other policy instruments, also projection for other emission gases, particles and metals, if you are talking about the national studies, and reporting to Convention of Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollutions. And of course, the projection of energy use with aim to identify the least cost solution, evaluate of impact of introduction energy and emission taxes, and evaluation of the impact of introduction of renewable and energy efficiency targets. These slides demonstrate some examples from the 2007 implemented energy efficiency policy results, saving respectively in 2000 and 2015 in energy sectors. Another one is implementation also of energy efficiency policy results in saving for the fuel import. If you are talking for the impact assessment of planet energy efficiency policy to expenses for imported fuel. So the last one is example of impact assessment of emission reduction cost for climate policy targets implementation for the 2030 results and additional costs if you are talking of several scenarios. Existing policy, 2030 targets, and the targets with emission trading. So this is all what we are doing in our institute. And with last slide, I also would like to show maybe not so much on the name what we are doing, but also on to demonstrate our stakeholders of our research and to demonstrate our research capabilities. So it's we are working with Latvian energy supply system and the development planning for the National Energy Research Program, also modeling of Latvian energy development scenarios for the public utilities, and the modeling of Latvian energy development scenarios for Ministry of Economics, impact assessment and main policy, and also the impact assessment for energy efficiency policy. As well, we are collaborating with the Ministry of Environment and Protection and Regional Development in case of GHG emission projection in Latvia till 2035 and emission projection 2015-2030 in Latvia. So we are doing also many other interesting things. So if you are interested more in details, please let me know. Also, my colleagues are here in this room, and I will talk with you about our research and results, of course, for research. Thank you very much for your attention, and wish you a fruitful meeting today. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So let's jump into the analysis itself. And for that role, I'm glad to invite to the stage Oras Tinkinen, the Senior Advisor of Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra.
Distinguished Minister, Ambassadors, dear old and new friends, are very excited to be here today to present the results of the Green to Scale analysis for the first time in Latvia, and I do hope that they are quite inspiring. As has been mentioned already, this has been a truly Nordic-Baltic joint exercise. You could say that the Nordic partners have been doing quite a bit of organizing and facilitating, but the brains behind this project really come from the Baltic states. And I would like to highlight the role of the Stockholm Environment Institute Tallinn Center in Estonia, and of course, our Latvian experts at the Institute of Physical Energetics. And what is this Green to Scale concept exactly? What have we been doing? We have basically been trying to understand how far we could go in tackling the climate crisis, simply using solutions and technologies that are already readily available and that have been implemented at scale, at least somewhere in some country. And just to give you one concrete example, let's say that we know that Norway has been particularly successful in introducing electric cars. Now, in Green to Scale, the question we ask is, what if other countries were able to reach by 2030 the same level, the same share of electric cars that Norway already has today? So simply expecting other countries to reach the same level in the coming little more than 10 years that some countries are already today. So it's a conservative exercise by nature, and I think it makes the results all the more exciting. As was already mentioned, in the previous two phases of the project, we have found a very large potential in scaling up existing climate solutions globally. First, we looked at different solutions from different parts of the world, and then we focused on Nordic solutions. And in the first case, the potential would be equal to a quarter of total global emissions today. So clearly a very big emission reduction potential. In the case of Nordic solutions, we found that we could perhaps reduce global emissions by as much as the European Union produces today combined. And both of these emission reduction potentials, according to our studies, seem to be available at very affordable costs. So taking into account both the costs of implementing these solutions and the savings that some of these solutions can provide, putting these together, we would actually not need to invest a whole lot of money to make these solutions happen. And perhaps more importantly, just a fraction of the money we today spend as the global community to subsidize fossil fuels would be enough to finance these solutions. And now we have been focusing on two sets of countries, as was already mentioned, and I'm going to talk about the results in very brief. But for those of you who are interested in learning more, we have the report available, and also there's a more technical, more in-depth background report. Both of these can be downloaded from our project website, greentoscale.net. I would also like to highlight that there have been other interesting studies. Many of you, of course, know already. The most recent example being the Bente study, looking at the energy situation and future here in the Baltic states. And we have also been working together with them. And I think many of the conclusions we have in our study are quite well aligned with what Bente report is saying. Well, now to the results. We looked at 5 European countries scaling up 10 different existing climate solutions, and what we found was, again, a very large potential to reduce emissions on top of the policies that these countries have already implemented. In 2030, in these 5 countries, that is the 3 Baltic states, Poland and Ukraine, the potential could be around 150 megatons. Is that a lot? Is that little? Perhaps 150 megatons doesn't really say very much. It is basically as much as Finland, Denmark, Norway, and Iceland produce today combined. So that much we could reduce emissions in just these 5 countries, scaling up these 10 solutions. And if you look at the solutions more specifically, 2 areas stand out quite quickly. The first one is energy efficiency, both in buildings and industry, and the second is renewable energy sources, especially wind and solar power. And I'm going to talk a bit more about these for Latvia a bit later. We also included a very rough estimate of the costs of these solutions, and I should highlight that these are in no way exact figures, and there are many uncertainties related to these. But I think the key message here is that if you put together the costs many of these solutions do have, and the savings some of these solutions can provide, specifically in energy efficiency, actually the net cost over time is negative, meaning that implementing these solutions has the potential to actually reduce costs rather than increase costs. And that is thanks to the energy efficiency solutions included. The focus of this study is on climate action, how we can do more to tackle the climate crisis, but I think it's important to bear in mind that many of these solutions are actually very attractive from other perspectives as well. Let's say we are able to invest more in renewable energy sources. In most cases, it means that our systems are more secure. We are less reliant on imported energy from other countries. We get closer to energy independence. And I know that in many countries, including my own in Finland, this is a very important consideration, not having to rely on other countries for your sources of energy. Or let's say that we move to electric cars, we replace cars running on diesel and gas with electric vehicles. That means that we can also reduce urban air pollution. It means that we will have to suffer less from various health impacts from pollution. And that again, I think, is a very important benefit to bear in mind. Now, specifically on Latvia, we found in the study that the additional emission reduction potential of scaling up these solutions could be around 3 megatons in 2030. And again, to put that figure into perspective, that little more than 3 megatons is pretty much as a country like Montenegro produces today. So it is not a huge amount on the global scale, but it is a meaningful emission reduction, I would argue. And as a share of projected 2030 emissions in Latvia, it could be more than 30%, so a very significant emission reduction again. And looking at the specific solutions in the context of Latvia, wind power really seems to provide a very large potential. That alone could possibly reduce Latvia's emissions in 2030 by more than 10%. But again, also energy efficiency solutions, also manure management in agriculture would, according to our study, have a fairly good potential. These, I hope, are interesting results, but I think even more interesting is what you can do with these results or how you can use them, hopefully. And what we have been trying to do is, first of all, identify solutions in which there is additional potential, in addition to the planned measures that Latvia, for instance, and the other countries are already implementing. But it also helps, hopefully, to pinpoint some countries and some policies that could hopefully help other countries to implement these solutions. So, for instance, coming back to the example of electric cars I used earlier, if we know that Norway has been particularly good at implementing electric cars, deploying them, what could we possibly learn from the measures, the policies that Norway has introduced to get these electric cars on the roads? Or wind power in the case of Denmark, or all the other solutions. And it's obvious, I think, to all of us that many of these approaches, many of these policies that other countries have chosen cannot be copied as such to other countries because the circumstances are different. But some of these experiences will hopefully be interesting when other countries craft their own policies specific to their needs. I also want to highlight that although in this study we focus on Nordic solutions specifically, I think it's quite clear that it goes both ways. There are several areas in which actually many of the Baltic states are more advanced than Nordic countries, and it would make sense for the Nordic countries to learn from the Baltic states. Just to give you two examples from our study, Latvia is already well ahead Nordic countries in terms of using bioenergy for heating and combined heat and power production. So I think it would be very interesting to see a Baltic green-to-scale study suggesting all these good solutions that the Baltic states can offer to Nordic countries and others. But if we share our lessons, if we learn from our successes and mistakes, all these experiences other countries have in implementing different climate solutions, I would argue that we can all move faster and further in terms of taking climate action. And that is why we have been doing this study. We also highlight some possible policies that could help in implementing these solutions in our study. Some of them are quite general. So let's say removing harmful subsidies or strengthening carbon pricing, setting ambitious targets. Very general policies, but can be helpful in making these solutions happen. But we also look at some a bit more specifically, and perhaps just to highlight a couple of examples. In the case of wind power, I think there are very good examples from many countries from recent years suggesting that using auctions to promote renewable energy sources, including wind power, is a very cost-effective way to make these investments happen. So perhaps that is something that could be of interest here as well. Another example, we find a big potential in improving energy efficiency in buildings. The lessons from some countries is that if you help organize the people living in buildings so that they are better able to make decisions about energy efficiency investments, then that will facilitate making these investments happen in reality. I would just like to end by saying that we are very much looking forward to working together with different partners in understanding better the potential of scaling up climate solutions and also making these climate solutions happen in reality. So if any of you are interested in exploring possibilities of working together in this fashion, we are very much open to that kind of discussions. And this is where I would like to end. Thank you so much for your attention.
I think it's a good opportunity to actually to hand over to policymakers your report, and by a coincidence, probably or probably not so much, we have a Minister for Economics of Latvia here with us, Mr. Arvils Ašaradens. Please accept the present. And I invite you, Mr. Ašaradens, to give a short commentary about the report, if it's possible. Thank you. Okay, let's do it long. We have some time.
So, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, to start with, I would like to express many thanks to organizers for the invitation to take part in Nordic Green Scale 2, and it's my true pleasure to have this opportunity to address such a distinguished audience and welcome you all, and especially our Scandinavian friends in Riga here today. And well, to look to climate outside, it looks like it's time to do something about its unexpected really change, and May is fantastic, but it's time for action. Yeah, green growth or environmentally sustainable economic growth is particularly important considering the current global environmental challenges, and it can boost productivity and efficiency use of natural resources while reducing pollution and emissions of greenhouse gases. Nordic Green Scale 2 is just in time to once again remind of the challenges and opportunities offered by green growth and to address country-specific circumstances for implementing environmental solutions and to understand tailor-made approaches for both Latvia and other focused countries in this project. Paris Agreement on climate change is a historical achievement. It sets the right direction to ensure that action is taken to mitigate climate change and limit global temperature increase. Moreover, it provides a broad and urgent demand for low-carbon and climate-resilient innovations. Latvia has ratified and fully committed to the goals of Paris Agreement. Since 1990, our greenhouse gas emissions have been reduced by more than 57%, and now we are preparing for implementation of targets agreed within European Union 2030. Latvia has a binding 6% emission reduction target for 2030 compared to 2005 for the sectors not covered by European Union's emission trading system. Latvia currently is developing its natural long-term low-carbon development strategy for 2050, as well as Latvia's national adaptation strategy for 2030 to be adopted in 2018. And we also started work on national energy and climate plan for 2130. To achieve our targets, we shall have to ensure significant transformations of our economy, but we already do have some very important experience and positive examples. One of the key drivers for emission reduction are taxes. Latvia has been amongst first countries to introduce a natural resource tax on CO2 emissions. It was done already in 2006, and this tax is mandatory for all installations in energy production and manufacturing industries and industry sectors. And starting from 2017, cars annual taxation will be based on CO2 emission specific values. To reduce emissions, we have organized open calls for projects within Latvia's budgetary program called Climate Change Financial Instrument, CCFI. As a result, grants in the amount of approximately for 200 million euros have been provided, those supporting more than 2,600 projects which aims to reduce emissions. We are also proud that in Latvia are evolving green bonds as for tackling climate change. It is important also for attract private funding. Altum, where we are right now having this meeting, is a second financial market participant after Latvenergo, a company that engages in this market niche by ensuring green bonds in Latvia. Considering that transport sector is one of the largest sources of emissions in Latvia, we promote use of electrical vehicles. For example, within the project creation of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, co-financed by European Regional Development Fund, the Road Safety Directorate is developing a national network of charging stations, which will consist of evenly developed fast charging stations throughout the territory of Latvia in order to ensure that electric vehicles can move freely throughout the country. At the policy level, the government has developed the alternative fuel development plan for 2017-2020, which sets targets, main action courses for introduction of alternative fuels by 2025. At the same time, modernization of the public transport system is encouraged. Between 2016 and 2023, almost 100 million euros from the Cohesion Fund will be invested to secure the renewal of public transport parks of regional municipalities by supporting the purchase of green public transport. We see that the industries also understand the importance of climate change and are part of the plan to achieve these goals. For example, Latvia's national airline, Air Baltic, in 2016 began replacing old aircrafts with the new custom-made environmentally friendly Bombardier CS300 aircrafts. Those aircrafts are the green single-aisle aircrafts in the class within 20% reduction of CO2 emissions. That means a decrease up to 6,000 tons of CO2 emissions per plane each year. Besides, each new aircraft will ensure 80% of fuel cost reduction per passenger compared to that of Boeing 737, which are replaced. In total, Air Baltic will receive 20 new aircrafts by 2019, which will make the average age of the fleet 2.5 years, significantly younger than the global average for airlines. Focusing on sustainable solution development and related issues are on agenda of Ministry of Economics as well. In this respect, support for industries to invest in R&D and innovation, energy efficiency and renewable energy advancement is central. For innovation and the competitiveness of Latvian SMEs, the Ministry of Economics has nearly 500 million in funding available within European structural funds in period 2014-2020. Planning period. As a result, for European Union funding, new innovative products, technologies and services is expected to be developed, having also a positive impact on environmental sustainability and green growth in general. In case of Latvia, it is worth to mention the positive impact of the Norway grants, both in previous planning period and new one, as this funding very contributes to increase competitiveness of green enterprises, greening of existing industries, and promoting green entrepreneurship. With this funding, we have achieved good results, and I believe that such results will achieve in the future as well. No doubt, the discussion on green growth and climate change issues must include a comprehensive dialogue with the stakeholders, parliament, government, business, civil society, and of course academia. I hope that Nordic Green Scale event will bring valuable discussions and offer solutions to address the issue of promoting green growth in Latvia and other focus countries. To this effect, I invite all you to be active, to use the opportunity to network, analyze case study examples, and participate in this fruitful dialogue. I wish you enjoy your stay in Riga. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. So I believe we have like general and also more particular suggestions in terms of the policy making in the report. So hopefully you take this back home and discuss with colleagues in the ministry. All right, let's continue. And our next topic is financing, which is a very crucial part when we talk about implementing different solutions in greening our industries. So I'm very glad to invite to the stage the first Vice President and Head of Lending at Nordic Investment Bank, Thomas Rangdahl. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be here, and the Minister ended his very good speech with saying that I hope we enjoy the time here in Riga, and I have very short time, but I dearly enjoyed last evening. I came late, and I thought, should I go to sleep or should I go out in the city? And I decided, well, I need some fresh air. It was like 10:30, and I was not back until 12:30 because it was so beautiful and so nice. It was a fantastic evening. It has something to do with cleanness also. I mean, on a very, small scale, but it was so clean and so beautiful. I'm amazed. So tourism is one thing that you should promote even more here in Latvia, for sure. Now, tourism is not directly what we should talk about, but we in NIB, we actually span over lots of things. So the main mandate that we have is to work with both environmental and productivity. We think that it often goes hand in hand. It's connected. We measure every project that we do. We measure it from the environmental point of view. We measure it from the productivity gains point of view. We have a special team of specialists that does nothing else but make the evaluations, and they are highly skilled academically and from experience. And really, we can't do project if they don't agree that this is good either from environmental point of view or productivity point of view. So when we analyze the project, we have, of course, the credit analysis. It is as important in any other bank. We're supposed to work basically on what we call sound banking principles. So we're not really subsidizing, even if, of course, when the projects are green, we are inclined to be very interested in doing them if they meet our standards. So that's basically the concept, and then we have the process with the credit process and the environmental and productivity process, and we take it through the administration, and it comes ultimately to the board. And of course, I'm very happy here to have the chairman of the board present, Kaspar Abelins. So yeah, you can give him a big hand because he's done a really good job as the chairman for a couple of years now in NIB. And he would help me today, and you should, of course, also here locally turn to him. But if you want to turn to him in his capacity as chairman, you better hurry up, because it's only today and tomorrow. Because from the 1st of June, we have the new chairman. It's rolling, of course, in NIB, so it's a Swedish one coming in. But thank you, Kaspar. I also have other colleagues here. I should mention, I have communication, who are the ones, it's Dimitri and Jukka. So they're sitting there and there, so you can also turn to them if you have more questions. They're the ones who's bragging about what we're doing, so they help with that. And of course, not least important, I have my colleague Kasti Talving, who's one of the people who are really doing the things, you know. We are just criticizing and say, improve that and so forth. But somebody needs to be there on the ground and doing the transactions. So Kasti would normally then work with the analyst team from the credit point of view, but also from the environmental and productivity, and to get the projects going forward. Now, to finance ourselves, we got a little equity from our dear states, and in the beginning it was the Nordic states only, but then of course later on with the creation or the independence of the Baltic states, it was a very good idea to expand the scope of Nordic Investment Bank to include also the Baltic countries. So with that, we are the bank for the Nordic Baltic countries, and we work with the capital we got from the start, and then some more capital from the Baltic countries. But that is, of course, not enough to finance all the projects that we think are good. We have a balance sheet in lending. which is some 17 billion euros. And we use that for projects mainly in the Baltic and Nordic area. So 85% of that goes into this area. We also do something outside the Nordic Baltic, actually. Why would we do that? Well, that is again to promote projects that are good from mainly the productivity point of view, but also connected to environmental, which is connected to the Nordic Baltic. So that would be, developers or larger or mid-sized companies that are having projects outside the Nordic Baltic. So we have that in some 40 countries, so we're not only in the Nordic Baltic. So we are an IFI, and IFI means International Financial Institutions, as you well know, so it means that we're owned by the government. But the capital that we got from the start, which we sort of have paid back through dividends many times, actually, over the years, would not be enough to finance all projects. We need to get more money, so we raise that from the capital markets. And then we come into something that the minister was alluding to also. We are raising bonds, and a lot of them now is green bonds. What does it mean? It means that the underlying projects that we are ultimately financing through the lending operation needs to have a certain degree of environmental effects. Who's deciding that? Well, we're deciding that with the help of our environmental analyst. And if it comes to this level that we think the project should have, well, we can use that to raise money from the capital markets. So we do that, of course, sort of similar in the value of the projects that we are financing per year. We do some 3 to 3.5 billion euros of new projects every year. So it means that we need to raise about that amount, a little bit more actually. So about 4 billion we take from the markets. And then we're of course helped by the fact, as you can see here, that we are AAA rated. So we can raise that money very affordable. More affordable than many other issues because of the AAA. Why are we AAA rated? Well, it helps to be owned by the governments of good rated companies, but that's actually not the only thing. But we do have a portfolio which the rating agencies, the Standard & Poor's and Moody's, think is of high value. And the organization and the effectiveness of the organization is working so good, actually. So let's say that we are actually independently rated AAA. Without the ownership support, that is sometimes thought that, well, if you can't carry out on your own, well, if you're owned by very good rated, in this kind, sovereigns, you get to a certain rating. But we actually have an independent AAA rating, so that helps when we do the financing. Now. So this is a nice description of a little bit what I talked about already. So the environment and productivity is the main focus, and then you can dive into a little bit what we mean with that. So of course on productivity we talk about the technical progress, innovation, human capital, improvement in infrastructure, market efficiency, and business environment. And I will give you some examples then of deals that we have done here in Latvia also and elsewhere maybe, on which fulfill both environmental and productivity. On environmental, and that's what the topic of today, of course, we talk about pollution reduction, preventive measures, resource efficiency, and development of clean technology and climate change mitigation. So all of this ties, of course, very well into the, I'd say, very good survey that Citra has done with their collaborators. I thought it was very good reading it, and it gets you to get a grip on what the opportunities are to even go further on the development of the green environment. Now, of course, you can scale things up and look at the greater scale, and there is those 17 development goals from UN, and I think we tick many of those boxes, and you can read for yourself here. But it's related to cleanness and efficiency, but also health and well-being. Health and well-being, do we finance that? Well, we do actually, ideally connected to environmental when we finance universities and schools in the membership countries. So when we then grade that and give this rating, as I say, then that would, from a productivity point of view, get a high rating, because it's understandable that education is important for the development of the society. It's important that people are highly educated and that works in an efficient way. It's important that people get the right health treatment in an efficient way. So that's good for the productivity. Environmentally, of course, we would love if those buildings that are used for that, for those services are built in a green way. And as many of you well know, there are different standards that different institutions are using to rate how good the buildings are. As with many things, when it comes to rating, we're pretty strict. We use BREEAM and LEED, which are a US and a UK firm who's rating houses, and we only accept the top notches there. Why would companies do this? Well, because for the tenants, it means, and it's connected to what you presented here, it means lower use of energy, so it's a saving in itself. But also it comes more and more in society that people expect, the younger generation, but also I think mid-age and older generation, expect that things that are rebuilt or new should have the highest standards when it comes to environmental. So we are financing those kind of projects. We do that in Latvia here. We are working with a renovation program in Latvia through the Latvian state. But we also finance new projects, new buildings that are built in the membership countries and also to some extent outside. Well, outside then it's connected that there is some companies from the Nordic Baltic that are building those houses on a green scale. So this was about the bonds, and I think those pie charts are saying two things, maybe, because it's a little bit how much we can issue on bonds is of course related to how much project we have, and of course the countries in the economies in the Nordic countries are quite bigger because there's more people and also still a little bit ahead in the economy development. So the large Nordic countries take a larger portion of the total lending that we do, and also then what we can finance from the based upon green bonds. When it comes to project types, you can see it. It's maybe what you could expect. We talk about renewable energy. We have a big project here with Latvian Ergo that we did many years ago, which is related to renewable energy that we're happy with. Wastewater treatment is high on the agenda. It's being very much pushed from the owners, not that this is important. We have many wastewater treatment plants. Actually, to give an example of a project that is not in the Nordic Baltic, but which it's pretty good for you in a way, and that is the Kaliningrad wastewater treatment plant, because that is not so far away. And the fact that we together, in this case with the Russians, are cleaning the waste that comes from Kaliningrad is of course very beneficial for the Baltic Sea. Public transport, absolutely important, and again from both productivity and environmental. So we have a rather big project here with the local authority, Riga when it comes to the purchase of new trams and hydrogen buses. So those are projects that we really like. Then we have green buildings. I talked about that already, and energy efficiency. I mentioned that also already. So this is basically already what we heard from the Citra speaker. Finance is needed. Do we do enough? I think NIB is instrumental in being one of the players here. Can we do much more or more? I think we can. We need to understand the project. We need to help to develop the project. It's important that the projects are sound from the environmental point of view, but also structural, and from our point of view, from a credit point of view. Can we take more risk? Yeah, maybe in projects. We have a risk level which is in the countries around BB+. That's where we are, and it means that some of the new projects and startup projects we can't do. We have a dialogue with the board, and we're going to actually we're going to take that to the board after summer. Sorry, Kaspars. Or will you be there? Yeah, I don't know, but but not as a chairman anyway. So we'll see where that will end up. But we're working with developing the bank all the time, and this thing that we will do now is much about developing the products and see if we can work a little bit with even equity, which that's not what we do, because the base of our funding is always long-term financing. So we're a strange bank in that way. We have many different projects, mainly in the Nordic Baltic, but also outside. We have one product, and that's long-term financing. So that's what we add to the marketplace from a financial point of view. So we're thinking if we can do a little bit more. When it comes to strategy, maybe I should mention that we had 3 years ago a strategy review, and then we said that, okay, let's do more for the SME sectors. That's important in the Nordic, but not the least in the Baltic, so we're working on that. Also mid-caps is there. Arctic is not so key for you, and then we should also be able to promote the projects outside. But the fifth one, and not the least, maybe first in this section, was that we would focus even more on the Baltic, the 3 Baltic countries. So that's a very clear statement from the board. Do more in the Baltics. So, well, we need your help also, and your acquaintances who knows about project, because sometimes we don't find the projects, but so we need to have dialogues and get that moving. This is we talked about that, and yeah, I think I mentioned actually most of the projects already in Latvia, and we have similar projects in your neighboring countries here, and of course similar projects in the Nordic countries. Have I forgotten anything? We have the opportunity during the panel here, and that's where questions can be asked, I think. Kaspars, anything that I should have said or shouldn't have said? No. Okay, I think I'll end there then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. Indeed, we'll have an opportunity to ask questions for our panelists, and discussion panel actually happens right now. So Thomas, don't run away. Actually, have a seat here. You can choose the seats since you're the first one to come. We have 2 ladies also in the panel. Evi Pudane from Cleantech Latvia cluster, and Julia Sandenberg from Fortum, the heat producer in city of Jelgava, if I'm not mistaken. All right, and we have another panelist, Oras Tinkinen, who you saw already. So my opening question is to Evi, actually, since you didn't have the opportunity to talk today, at least publicly. Today's discussion and the presentations of the report are much about the idea of learning from each other, right? So, and my question is not in regards what Latvia can learn from, I don't know, Nordics, but what do you think, what other countries could learn from us? I know that you are in cluster, are very active together with the companies going abroad and also educating others about different solutions. So, could you comment on this one?
Good morning, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Oscar, for your question. And I think that for every one of us, it's very important that we are making our competencies complementary and finding our partners in all the aspects in our lives that we are doing. And also for me, it was very important to building the relations with Nordic countries, because when we are going to the Central Asian post-Soviet countries, working there with green tech solutions, then it's always important, not just only our experience. Sometimes we need countries and companies who is step ahead before us, or sometimes we need those small startups or some small companies that could able to be very, very quick and respond to the requirements of market very quickly. I think that is some our preference, that most of our companies are small and sometimes even several times smaller than our partners in the Nordics, but it helps to us to be flexible and quick.
I know that you've traveled all around Central Asia, I believe, or I mean, most of those countries. Is there anything in particular that Latvia is really good at? That they would say like, wow, you knew this? You can teach us this one?
You know, the latest is GIS systems. This geographical information systems. Yeah, we are very proud. Our companies are very, very effective. They are small, but their solutions are highest on the top. And yes, we are perfect on this there.
I believe Latvia is also part of Nordics, at least. That's the newest trend, how to define Baltic countries. And in Nordics, it's cold in winter, as we know, and luckily we have companies like Fortum producing heat. What is that you produce heat of currently? Is it biomass? Is it gas?
Well, we actually have a very wide range of fuels, and if we're talking about particularly what we're doing in Latvia, again, we are an international company, so we have experience from many countries in the Nordics, but also we're present in Poland, we're present in the UK, we're present in Russia, and so forth. But here in Latvia, we currently have operations in Jelgava, where we have a fairly large bio-CHP, which we fire with biofuels, with wooden chips and forest residues. And with that, we produce electricity to the grid, and we also produce heat to the inhabitants of Jelgava.
So in today's discussions context, do you see any opportunities to even more, reduce CO2 emissions in your company?
Absolutely, and that's what we work for every day. That's our purpose of existence, I would say. So we definitely see that there's a possibility to continue. And I think that was also mentioned from the financing sector here as well, that sustainability is in demand. And I think this is really important. This is the drive somehow. We need to understand that it's attracting capital and that people are interested and the institutions are interested in financing these kind of developments, and it's part of the growth. So definitely there is a big possibility to continue to have the transition accelerate, I would say, to take out the fossil fuels and bring in all kinds of biofuel-based fuels. I would like to say that as well. We will be moving now into lower value fuels, meaning that residue fuels from the forest industry, for example, agricultural industry, and so on. This is an area that will be growing in the next few years.
All right. Oras, you mentioned this already in your presentation about the largest potential for Latvia, the industry and the buildings, also wind power. All right, this is a huge potential, but how do we actually practically harness that potential and make things into practice?
I already mentioned one possible tool that has turned out to be very promising in many other countries, which is the renewables auctions. And we've seen very good results in a lot of different European countries in the past years. But then,
May I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Is all for everybody clear that the term renewables auctions?
right, yes.
Because I don't know what it is. Can you just briefly explain, so maybe there's somebody like me in the room as well?
No, that's a great point. So basically, in renewables auctions, the state says we want a certain amount of green electricity, and then all the companies can say that, well, we could do this much at this cost. And then you put all the bids together, and then whoever gives you the lowest price will get the contract.
Does it also involve the investment part, or it's covered by the private partners then?
The private partners would cover that in most cases. So basically, it's just a competition of who is able to provide you with green electricity at the lowest price. And actually, what we have seen in, let's say, the past 1 or 2 years in some countries is that in many cases you don't actually even need a subsidy, because some of these technologies, wind power in particular, are already so competitive that you can basically introduce them on market terms without extra subsidies. But the auction is a good tool to kind of get those different technologies on the market. So I would definitely encourage to have a look at that as an option. But then I think in many cases what slows down wind power projects in many countries, perhaps also here in Latvia, is the different regulatory and planning and administrative requirements related to that. So if it's a very lengthy and complicated process to get all the permits and to get all the assessments done, then of course that slows down project development. And sometimes there is room for making that process a bit more efficient.
Do you see solar as a solution in this case? Because to me, as a normal citizen, I think solar panels are less harm in terms of how I see the environment, because those wind turbines are quite noticeable. So what about this aspect in Latvia's case?
I think it's a timescale issue. If you look at the coming, let's say, 10 or 15 years, the potential of solar power may not be that large. But I already referred to this Pente study, which looks at the energy scenarios for 2050. And there you can actually see that in the 3 Baltic states, there is a very large role for solar power, especially as we get closer to 2050. And if you want to be there in 2050, you need to start possibly already today, at least with small steps.
All right. Any questions so far from the audience? There was this hand raising, but that was a telephone and a person taking photo of me. I didn't sign the permission for this, but yeah, there is finally, yeah. First question here.
Hello everybody, Valdis Vitoļņš, Latvian District Heating Association, also the manager of the board of Jūrmala District Heating Company. I think it's a question more to Julia. What's your opinion about the biomass? We understand the biomass is quite a good thing, but do we as the energy companies look a bit forward and think already about another energy uses, the green energy uses, and maybe others also can comment on that, because the biomass is today, but what will be in 20 or 20 or 120 years ahead? Thank you.
If I can start, it's all a matter of time perspective, I suppose, also here. I think that if we're looking very, very far ahead, we probably will not be burning anything anymore at all. Probably somehow in the circular economy there will be certain fractions that we feel that we would be using for some energy recovery. They will be quite small if we look in the very, very large scale future. But if we look at the situation that we have now and the next development of fuels, as we see it, first of all, we will be developing towards lower value fuels, as I sort of started to mention already. We're not taking prime round wood and using it as chips, as we might have in the beginning of the bio-to-energy industry. We will now be using more residues, which we already are today, but that will be more and more intensified. And also, of course, we're seeing that all kinds of residues from society will be part in the energy recovery system. With this, I mean all kinds of waste fuels from society, a lot of issues, a lot of flows of RDF, for example, will be coming into our systems very soon, we think. And it will be integrated with our waste management system, which in the future will probably not be called waste management anymore. It will be called resource management.
Horace, any comments on this?
First of all, I absolutely agree with that. I think it's good to think of the low-carbon future as a whole. We will not only need to decarbonize energy production, we will also need to decarbonize transport and many other sectors. And in this low-carbon future, there is going to be a lot of competition for the limited resources of sustainable biomass we have available. So then the question is, if we only have this much biomass we can sustainably use, should that go to, for instance, biofuels for aeroplanes or shipping? Or are there some industrial processes where that biomass is more desperately needed than for heating purposes? So I would very much agree it's a timescale issue. If we can today replace fossil fuels in energy production with biomass, let's do that. But in the long run, we might need that biomass somewhere else.
Thomas?
Yeah, no, just 2 reflections maybe. When it comes to wind and solar, sometimes you're surprised where they are applicable, because you don't need the sun all the time, as you surely know, that there's some effect even if it's a cloudy day, so it could be useful. I was at a meeting in Jordania where we also have some exposure, but it was another IFIs who had the annual meeting, and you would think Jordania, that must be sun, right? I mean, they have sun all the time, but the highest potential in Jordania is wind. the wind is blowing a lot there. So they have more potential for wind power than solar. So you should expect the unexpected sometimes and be able to think outside the box. The other reflection, and I'm happy to hear the other panelists' view on that, but of course a lot of the energy would be more decentralized. It will be, you talk about solar panels on the roof and small wind farms and so forth. So how do you see that change and development from your perspective? That's a question to
that's more like a rhetorical question. Maybe we touch upon that a bit later. We have another question from the audience.
Kaspars from Latvian Chamber of Commerce and Industry Energy Committee. In the report, you are showing the largest potential in buildings, so energy efficiency. Can you mention what specifically did you mean, what kind of technologies, and what specifically could it be, so that end customers could have a better understanding? Thanks.
It's a portfolio of technologies, really. Some are related to using heating more efficiently, so insulation, for instance. Some are related to the kind of building technology such as air conditioning and getting some of the heat that now gets lost to better use. Then there are some things like lighting. There is a certain potential improving the energy efficiency in lighting. So it's not really any single technology, but a portfolio of different options to make the energy use more efficient in buildings. And I should also say that in this report, we don't go into that much detail, but in the previous reports, we have looked at the example of Germany and how they have been able to improve the energy efficiency in existing building stock. And I think some of the solutions that Germany has been applying might be of interest to other countries as well. So perhaps that could be interesting to explore further.
Can you comment on any numbers regarding the existing buildings and these portfolios of different solutions and technologies, like you mentioned, lighting and different stuff? What's your assessment of potential savings, reduction of energy usage?
Well, in this study, we did not go into details in individual technologies under these various solutions, so we don't have that disaggregated data available. But if you look at just the headline figures, in the case of Latvia, the potential of energy efficiency in buildings is closer to 1 megaton in 2030. And if you take into account that Latvia as a country as a whole doesn't produce that much emissions, it is a very significant contribution in that regard.
Yes, very shortly. Of course, we have those institutions that measure whether the product is good from an environmental point of view. So that helps us in our analysis. Another point in the analysis that we use is 30%. If the energy saving is more than 30%, we think it's a good project.
Yeah, Thomas, I was very pleased to listen to your yesterday's experience going out, and it was so nice and beautiful. But if we talk about business, and what do you think about the, sectors or industries that could be financed in terms of the, in context of this today's event, energy efficiency and clean energy? What's your opinion about Latvia?
No, I think the sectors that we are already into and that we have talked about here are the main one. Of course, energy, but I was a little bit surprised, even if you're into it most days, about the effects on the buildings and the energy efficiency there that you showed in your views. So that's where you can really. It's not so visible and maybe so exciting in a way, but there's a lot of effect that you can get from that. But also on the industrial side, energy savings there. Of course, we want to be involved in that.
Evie, you spend quite a lot of time with companies. Of course, the clean tech focuses we talk about. What do you think, what are the main barriers for Latvian clean tech solutions to be implemented, both locally and abroad?
You mean main areas?
Main barriers, main obstacles.
I think that it's always a lot of questions about the financing. It's if we're considering that some of the investments going to the small and medium companies, it's very crucial for them that those technologies are competitive and giving some financial benefits. Another way, it's just talks. If we take a look further where we are traveling, then it's I see that the biggest barrier for today in target markets where we are working is the lack of knowledge.
Lack of knowledge about the market itself?
No, about energy efficiency solutions, about technologies, about the best technology that is available, about the most competitive technologies. And we still see that there's a huge potential also in Latvia that there's not enough technicians, enough engineers that very well knows the technical solutions and are capable to explain those solutions to the potential customer in the Latvian, in the simple language, with the simple explanations and numbers. And also I think that I really like the question about the decentralization. This is something that we see in the fast-growing markets, that a lot of solutions are going decentralized. And they went, especially in the energy sector. And it's not because of some strategy, it's just because of the need.
It just happens.
It happens. There's some places where there's no electricity available, but people already love to use the mobile phones, TVs and so on, and just to boil water, and they love to use the energy, and so they go to the small wind farms, small solar panel farms, and so on. And I see that this is becoming more and more powerful. That the companies and entrepreneurs are going to build their own systems for access to the energy, to the source, to the heat, to the cold. It differs in the countries, but they're going to build their independent source. And it's become less dependent on the country decisions or monopolist decisions, what will be the price, what will be the source accessibility, and so on.
Okay. Julia, let's assume that for, I don't know, some time period you're, for some reason, in the, different role, making decisions, ministry or something like that. So what do you think? What's the most important for Latvia to reach or even exceed the emission reduction targets? What would you do or initiate?
Well, I would say, first of all, I think it's very important, something that also Mr. Ashiradan's already said. This is an opportunity. And I'm very, very happy to hear that from the ministry, and it's something that we've also been talking about for quite some time. At first glance, you might be seeing it as a threat for the industry. Things are going to get expensive, it's going to be difficult, and how we're going to move through. But actually what happens here is again, coming back to that sustainability isn't demand, it means it does attract investment. It means it does attract growth. And it's a matter of finding a way to navigate here with the agility that Latvia might have as a smaller country. I think this will be a very strong point for the future to work forward with. And I absolutely don't think we should see it as a threat. Yes, we are in transition. Yes, it means that some of the systems that we have established today will have to be changed. It will cost money, but it will also bring opportunities and it will bring growth. And we need to remember that. And we need to make the most of it.
All right, thank you. So before I run out of questions, I would like you to participate as well with yours. Do we have questions in the audience at the moment? Yes?
Yes, hello, my name is Ugis Malmanis, Riga Technical University. I very much appreciated as Mr. Tinkinen introduced a new term like renewable auctions. And I'm looking forward that also in Latvia we do introduce such renewable auctions because from the theory of economics, it comes that all of the society would benefit. In opposite, if that would be private companies who would be just proposing their best bids. So, and this is my intention. Okay.
Any comments on this one? Anybody?
Well, if I may just build on that, I think it's a good case in which looking at the experiences of other countries makes it so much easier for you to introduce the policies you want for Latvia. Because there is a wealth of knowledge today about what works in terms of auctions and what doesn't work so well. And you can skip the phase of making mistakes, at least to some extent, by looking at how it has worked in, let's say, I don't know, well, Finland has just introduced the auction, so don't come and learn from us, but some others that are more advanced in this regard. So you don't need to repeat the same mistakes, and you can fine-tune the system so that it is much more advanced and efficient than the ones that did it in the first place, let's say 5 or 10 years ago. So I think it's a great opportunity.
Thomas, banks have moved from buildings like these, you know, with all those big counters and many employees, more to you know, becoming like IT companies, and of course innovating a lot in their processes. So what do you see in regards of investing in clean energy and all the solutions we talk about today? Is there any example that you could mention about innovative approach in financing such projects?
Yeah, I can talk about that from a conceptual point of view, what we're doing. I mean, we're following, of course, everything that happens with digitalization for the finance industry. We think it's very important. We think that the blockchain possibilities would be very much applicable, not only to creating cryptocurrencies, but also in the social and environmental field. And we actually have two sort of streams in the bank where we look at what we call innovation lab, you know, see what we can do in the development of digitalization and other aspects related to that. But we also have concrete projects where we work with an external provider on how we can use potentially the blockchain in supporting environmental friendly development in emerging markets, which is an interesting project that is really early stage, so please don't ask me anything more about it.
Yeah, all right. So probably the blockchain is here to stay, and we'll see its beneficial advantages in quite near future. Questions from your side? Yes?
Andrea Shinska connects about grid. Since I represent a natural gas transmission and storage operator, I have the following question to you. So last week I was in Copenhagen Infrastructure Forum, and there was presented a study a frontier economic study regarding future of energy in the way that what is the best way to transport energy and store energy. So, and there was a kind of broad picture made regarding all kinds of energies. So it's renewables, of course, natural gas, electricity, and so on. And then the main conclusion was the best way how to transmit and how to store energy is existing natural gas infrastructure. Do you have any views on that? And can you comment on that? Thank you.
Who is taking this one? Not me, definitely.
Well, I can say something. First of all, maybe the convention had a lot of gas representing companies, is my first reflection. But on a more serious point, it is one of the theories. There are several theories on how do we actually meet the future when we will have intermittent or volatile electricity production. Because in essence, we're talking about electricity production in the future. We're talking about wind and solar. And we understand that it will be volatile. We're already seeing now, for whoever follows the spot electricity prices, are seeing that even in May, we have very volatile prices at the moment, quite high in the daytime and quite low in the nighttime, which is not usual for Latvia, where we have quite high flow at the moment with hydro stations working full. But having said that, then of course there's a lot of theories on how we develop the electrical grid in order for it to cope with this, and what will the different kind of storage mechanisms, how will they play into this? Will we be talking about pumped hydro, or will we be talking about other things? And one of the theory, of course, is to use electricity to create gas. But then we're not talking about natural gas as such. We're talking about the infrastructure, as you were also mentioning, that we would be using the infrastructure that we currently have. This is not my area of expertise, so I can't really say, but in essence, I would think that it would need quite a lot of adaptations for its new life, if that would be the case. And it would need to be quite an elaborate financial exercise and calculation to see whether it's worth doing that. In parts, why not? And there's no contradiction in such. So it's quite possible that this is one of the scenarios that the world will be looking at for we're now talking the next 20, 30, 40 years.
I think it's an interesting question, and we're sort of sometimes in the middle of those things because we do finance the LNG terminal in Klaipėda. So, our experts, as I referred to earlier, they are doing the analysis, what's the most optimal way to get gas to the consumers in this case, mainly in Lithuania, but also maybe re-exporting to here. So it's difficult topics, of course, and there is, generally speaking, one can say, I think, that from the bank's perspective, we always like diversity from all aspects. So if you have many different sources, that's good for the productivity and also often for the environment.
Yes, hello, Jean-Marc Bedmar, RB Rail, coordinator of Rail Baltica project. Surprisingly, your study is not in the transport part, is only dealing about road transportation and not about other modes, and in particular with rail, whereas there is in the Baltic and in Latvia many projects improving the rail will provoke some modal shift. There is Rail Baltica, and also make more decarbonization of rail transport. As also electrification of Latvian railway, also Lithuanian railways, and new electric trains were also going to make more attractive the railway sector. So could you maybe explain all this fact? Thank you.
Absolutely. So our study looked at 10 solutions, but we are very much aware that there are many, many more out there. In the previous reports, we have included a total of 30 different solutions. So in the transport sector, we also looked at cycling in cities, for instance, and bus rapid transit. But of course, there are still many more out there. I think there's this very interesting book called Project Drawdown that was released not too long ago that includes 100 climate solutions. And there's this gentleman, Bertrand Piccard, who is going to list 1,000 climate solutions. So if we at some point get more time and money, we could have a very much thicker report, including also, for instance, the rail options you mentioned. So I think the key message is that even if you include 10 solutions alone, you can still reduce emissions quite a bit. If you include 20 or 30 or 50 solutions, obviously the potential is going to be much larger. And as someone who as quite a bit younger, used to take the night train through the Baltic states, I would very much support investing and developing the railway system also here so that I could enjoy that also in the future.
Thomas?
Thank you for raising this, and I do allude to communication in the city here that we are financing, but of course rail is super important for Nordic Investment Bank also. We finance a lot of projects in the Nordic Baltic, and in Latvia we have 52 million euros outstanding, both for infrastructure and for locomotives, so absolutely important.
We have one more question here.
Thank you. Einar Stilinsks from Latvian Parliament and then Riga Technical University as well. The question is that mainly this report as well as Bente report focuses on technical solutions and some cost estimates. However, it is very essential how to introduce these options in a coordinated way that needs some kind of institutional change and in a wider sense society change also, how to get public acceptance on all that. And so can you maybe focus on this issue and the Nordic way of the wider society change to introduce all that? Thank you.
I think that is a very important point, and in the previous studies we have also looked at some behavioral solutions such as cycling in cities or cutting food waste, so there is clearly a lot of opportunities outside of the technological options as well. Regarding the different institutional arrangements, I would perhaps highlight one example because I find it quite promising, which is what is called the Climate Law or Climate Act in many countries. It was first introduced by the UK quite many years ago. Now now it's in Nordic countries, at least in Finland and Sweden. And it basically sets the framework for making climate policy. And you can have different features in different laws in different countries. But for instance, you might have a piece of the law saying that climate policy should be informed by independent experts. So for instance, in the Finnish context and in the UK context, there is an independent expert body advising the policy that the government is making to make sure that the policies are based on good evidence. Another example is that you could set carbon budget in the law. So let's say you have an emission reduction target for 2030 and 2050. The law could actually include more detailed carbon budgets and how you process those. So for instance, let's say that you have an emission reduction target of X for this year, then come the end of the year, you realize that you did not quite reach your target. Perhaps the law could include a mechanism to report to the parliament and tell that, okay, well, we have this shortcoming of X tons of CO2. This is how we are going to deal with it next year. And these are the policies we are going to introduce to make sure that we meet the targets in the future. So it's a bit abstract, it's very institutional, it's a bit administrative, but I think in the experience of especially the United Kingdom, it has helped in making climate policy a bit more structured and also base that on evidence.
More questions? Others, 10 solutions. Okay, we could include 100 or 1,000, but it's 10. But still, the criteria to include them in the report were quite strict. And they had to be proven working, which means they have a long track record, or at least a reasonable track record. Have you also looked at emerging solutions that are, promising a really high potential, and can you name them?
Absolutely. I think you can think of solutions from the point of view of the level of maturity, and the solutions we have covered in the report are very mature technologies or solutions. They are already on the market on commercial terms. And of course, if you look a bit further into the future, you are going to find many very interesting options. And perhaps just to give you a couple of examples, what we did not cover here is solar heating. And I think there are very interesting cases from, let's say, Denmark, where they use solar heating to provide district heating for cities. And I think that could be one thing to explore in the future. Another example, perhaps a bit further in the future, is what Sweden is exploring today by building electric highways. So you have trucks on highways, and they could actually run on electricity because there is a source for that electricity on the highway itself. So you don't have to have huge batteries on the truck, but you can charge your truck like you charge the trolley buses. So that could be one way to reduce emissions.
I think they're building the first kilometer in Sweden, is
yes.
it? Okay.
And they are exploring that right now, and it's interesting to see if that is going to be successful in the future. Another example of electrification is what Norway is doing regarding ferries and even airplanes. So Norway is planning to electrify at least short-distance small flights with small airplanes in medium-term future. And if they are successful in doing that, obviously that would be a very interesting opportunity for other countries as well.
All right. Anything for closing remarks? Some future promises or expectations, or
I would just like to say something more about the question that was said by the audience here regarding changes in society and the way we perceive this the climate threat and what we're going to do about it and how we're going to change. So actually the will to change, if I'm going to translate it to that. And I think that this is, of course, very fundamental in do we actually want to do something about it? And I think that this is important also for citizens in Latvia to really feel part of the change. The change is here. It's a matter of how we feel part of the change. And I can, over the 3 years that I've been living here, already see that there is a slight shift actually in this. And we are currently collaborating with a movie-making company, for example, who are going to do the first green movie in Latvia. And I think this is really exciting. There's other industries are joining in. We can see that there is a value in the I feel good about the way I live, I feel good about what I'm doing. And this will accelerate a lot. And why will it accelerate? Because actually the new generation is doing very well in how they put their own priorities. And I would say that that is something that is very reassuring for the future.
Thank you for this dose of optimism, and I think we can close our discussion. And I thank our panelists very much for sharing your opinions and being open with about your thoughts. And I also thank the ambassadors of Sweden and Finland for participation, and of course our Minister for Economics in Latvia. Ladies and gentlemen, with this I conclude the event. I invite you to do some networking, talk to each other, have some snacks and drinks. Thank you.